Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's live Q&A session. My name is Marcy Melzer, and I am an intuitive speech and language pathologist consultant, and I help parents teach their late-talking children how to use the words they need to share their wisdom with the world. And I do that in my Waves of Communication parent coaching programs, and also via the videos that I put out on Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching on the replay, thanks for joining. These Q&A videos seem to be very helpful for parents because a lot of parents have the same kinds of questions, so thanks for joining us as well on the replay. Like I said, my name is Marcy Melzer, and I have been collecting questions from parents all week on my Waves of Communication platform, and today I'm going to start with a question that came in wondering about my take on apraxia. And so I'm going to get started with today's Q&A by talking about language facilitation and kids who have apraxia or apraxia diagnosis. And the thing about apraxia, verbal apraxia, is that actually the condition in its true form is quite rare. And in my career, 30 years of doing therapy across people of all ages, from 0 all the way up to 100, true verbal apraxia without a stroke involved, without some kind of a neurological accident happening, is actually quite rare. In fact, in children, I can see true apraxia, verbal apraxia, coming out in maybe only 5 or fewer cases in the thousands of children that I have seen for speech and language therapy over the years. And the reason that a lot of parents are getting an apraxia diagnosis right now is because there are a lot of things that look like apraxia that might not necessarily be actual apraxia of speech. So the first thing that I want to say to anybody out there who has a child with an apraxia diagnosis is that you really need to consider how that apraxia diagnosis was provided. And I did a video about apraxia on my YouTube channel, so you can tune in and check that out. It's a lot more rare than it is diagnosed, and the way to know if really motor planning, which is what apraxia is. It means that the motor planning coordination in the brain, at the brain level, not at the mouth level, but at the brain level, is off. Neurologically, there's something that's causing the motor planning necessary for talking to be off. That's what apraxia is, okay? When the motor planning is not working at its best. And one of the ways that you can identify if motor planning is actually one of the culprits in your child's late talking is by looking at their eating patterns. If your child has trouble with eating foods, not digestively, but with their mouth. So if they have trouble drinking from straws, if they have trouble chewing, if they're very, very messy eaters and food is all over the child's mouth, if they tend to not chew food and just swallow it whole, these are for kids who have, otherwise typically developing, and they're not talking. Watch for motor planning problems with eating because the same structures are used for both eating and talking. And if there's a neurological motor problem where the motor issue, the motor coordinating parts of the brain are affected neurologically, then it can cause a child to have difficulty developing verbal speech. And I always say but and at the same time because you need to consider all of these things. Because they're so closely related, with a true verbal apraxia. It can exist that there are also pathways in the brain that are dedicated just to language learning. And if those things are affected, it can also cause it to look like a motor problem, but it might be a language learning problem. It might be a word finding problem versus a neurological motor planning thing. So to tell if it's motor planning, and considering that true verbal apraxia is rare, where it's just all about the ability to find the words, but not the actual mouth working stuff, which is what apraxia is, to know the difference is to compare and look at your child's eating and how they developed eating. They might eat okay, but they might eat differently than other people. They might be, like I said, very sloppy. They might chew funny. They might gulp food. So if their eating patterns are off, also their walking patterns. So if a child has motor disturbances in their brain that are strong enough to affect their late talking, they may also have fine motor problems and gross motor problems. So look at your child's evolution of walking if they're very young and see if they can, how their evolution of walking evolved. Because again, if it's skewed because of motor planning issues, then it might be motor planning issues that have to do with what is causing your child's late talking. Because it is important to understand what the root cause is for your child's late talking. And while apraxia exists out there as a diagnosis, the first thing you need to really realize is that you can't properly test for verbal or speech apraxia until a child is old enough and cognitively aware enough to respond to the testing to test for apraxia. Because so many things, it's usually identified in children who have difficulty with imitating what the therapist or practitioner or evaluator is trying to get the child to do. They think if a child can't imitate things, even if they try over and over and they try to elicit this imitation and the child isn't able to do it, or they also get the diagnosis if they're even inconsistent with imitating, because that's one of the trademark red flags or identifiers of apraxia, early childhood apraxia, is inconsistency in imitation. But I posit that also childhood and inconsistency in wanting to respond to adults' testing in children under 3 is also a cause for inconsistent imitation. So if a child is younger than 5 or 6 years old, cognitively, their ability and their late talking, you just don't have a way to test if it is truly verbally apraxic, because there's all different kinds of imitation of speech that have to be tested to really determine if this is a neurologically caused situation. But if the therapist is evaluating the child and they're younger than 5 or 6 years old and they're inconsistent with imitation, that doesn't count as a red flag to me, because there's lots and lots and lots of things that cause a child to be inconsistently imitating. What about poor auditory input because of ear infections? If they're not used to hearing things, they're not going to imitate. That's just one example of many, many other things that cause a child to be inconsistent with imitating. So if your child doesn't have any other motor issues, they walked on time, they eat well, they drink from a straw, and they just are quiet and they're not trying to use words at all, then you really want to look at other things in addition to it just being a motor issue that could be causing this late talking, okay? Because there are many, many other things. The other thing about apraxia that most parents need to know is even if your child does get a diagnosis of apraxia, because there is some suspicion somewhere by the testing that the therapist did, they might put things in your kid's mouth, they might ask them to do things with their tongue, and they're complicated things. Lateralize your tongue, which means move it side to side, elevate it, lift it up, put it down on command. These are not normal things that kids do with their tongue, and they may not even be understanding completely the things that the therapists do. So most early childhood of apraxia diagnosis are given, even justified by the American Speech and Hearing Association, as suspected. And this is under 3 to 4 years old. And I'm telling you that under 3 to 4 years old, there are so many things, and the American Speech and Hearing Association agrees that any apraxia diagnosis can't be firmly given until a child is able to be completely tested through all of the abilities to imitate the nonverbal and the verbal movements of the mouth. And this level of testing is not easy for a child to do, especially a nonverbal child who's under 5 or 6 years old. So if your child has any kind of attention issues, in addition to late talking, if your child has any type of hearing related issues, if your child has any kind of vision problems, if there's any kind of physiological health issues, gut issues, all of these things can cause a child to be late talking. And many of the characteristics of all of those other things resemble apraxia. So if you hear the word apraxia coming at you when an evaluator is talking about your child, I want you to really ask that provider, that evaluator, what it was from a motor planning perspective that indicated that that's what's going on with your child. That's the first thing that you should do. And the second thing that you should do is, no matter what is causing that motor planning thing, if you're firmly developed, because maybe your child does have other physiological motor planning issues. Maybe they were a late walker, or they learned to, army crawl and then started to walk, or maybe they have fine motor issues, or maybe they do have a lot of eating issues, and there are motor planning problems that are going on with your child's mouth, which actually do happen, okay? In kids who have multiple motor issues. It still is important for you to, if it's a motor weakness thing and you're trying to increase your child's strength in their mouth, then you want to do verbal movement that has to do with sounds. You want to practice pre-speech kind of talking to get those motor connections in the brain connected. That's what motor planning is. And the way to teach a child to improve motor planning, if motor planning is truly an issue with your child, is through practice. Nothing but practice of the best speech word level production that your child can do, or meaningful production. So if your child can't say words, don't work on single parts of words. That's a very common strategy for kids to use with apraxia. Again, for kids who are older than 5 or 6 years old, but not for little kids. Little kids need to learn to say the whole word at the same time. They need to hear all of it, because even if you suspect it's a motor planning issue and it's not, and it might be a language acquisition issue, you don't want to eliminate your child hearing the whole best right words right way at the right time. Don't split up words. Don't leave off the beginnings or ends of words, because your child's listening to the speech that you're saying, and you want them to be imitating the whole word correctly. You don't want them to start to call everything by the first sound, which happens often when these kinds of teaching methods are instituted with kids with suspected apraxia or suspected suspected motor planning issues with their speech delay. So that's the thing that's the most important about it. Whether you suspect or don't suspect, think it's apraxia or not, it doesn't matter what it's called. All of your speech that you are directing to your child should be modeled accurately, precisely, and with in the right context so that your child can learn the natural speech. That's what natural language facilitation is. The prompt methods that get kids to say parts of or motor planning to move between sounds and ooh, ee, ow, that kind of practice with speech is appropriate, I believe, as a practitioner who practiced speech for 30 years, only appropriate for adults or kids older than 5 or 6 years old. My friend Mark, who works with adults who have apraxia after stroke, this method can be very helpful for retraining the motor planning issues. But that is in people who already used to talk, whose motor planning was originally developed to use this talking and then they lost it. They're trying to regain those motor planning experiences in their brain that were damaged by the stroke. Little kids don't have it established yet. Late talkers don't have it established yet. And so the language learning processes of your child's brain are very, very important for you to consider when you're modeling language to them. You want to model it developmentally at a level where they could potentially imitate it when they get more comfortable, when their motor planning improves, or whenever they are ready to start to imitate the verbal speech that you have, physiologically ready. But they require this level of specific verbal demonstration, which is what language facilitation is. Even if it's motor planning, whatever is the problem, you must do this as well. All right, so here is a great question from Matt and Aaron. My son was just diagnosed with expressive language delay with probable apraxia. He's 2.5. This makes sense now since he is 2.5. Right, so expressive language delay is definitely what the speech therapist can see in a child who is 2.5 years old, but they cannot diagnose it with apraxia because they can't test it. So probable or suspected or these kinds of things. So what probably happened in the evaluation there, Matt Aaron, is that the therapist was trying to get the child to imitate things and they couldn't. So my suggestion is if you do natural language facilitation following the videos on my YouTube channel and the things that I've done, and if you do that without any pressure or prompting to get your child to talk, don't ask them to say words, just model the language for them, just like I talk about in all my videos. If you do that, then and not expect your child to say words, then you should naturally see your child start to imitate you. But sometimes it takes a little while. It depends on how much prompting they've been exposed to before. It depends on how shy they are. It depends on how physiologically ready they are. Every child is different. So what you need to realize when you're doing this language modeling is you can't give up after just a day or two. That you're really trying to change some big lifestyle practices with what's going on. So apraxia is definitely, like I said, a term that is used for children who are younger than 3, but I think it's ridiculous to even start to discuss motor planning issues in children unless they have a lot of motor planning issues, unless their mouth is really not working, unless they have a tongue tie, unless they have some real physiological structural stuff that's going on with their ear, nose, and throat things. You have to try to get that system as healthy as possible on the outside. The neurological part is the back. It's the engine. It's the neurological programming, of the computer to make this part work. But the physiological physiological health of your child's ear, nose, and throat must also be in good shape in order for them to naturally want to use their mouth to talk. If a child's got a sore throat, you don't feel like talking if you have a sore throat. So even if it's just allergies and chronic allergies, maybe your child's nose is always running. Maybe it's just ear, nose, and throat health that could be involved. What happens with kids who have ear, nose, and throat health issues is that they're quiet anyway. They don't talk much and they don't get much practice using the motor planning structures of their mouth. Late talkers by design are not talking. They're not training their brain to use the motor practices they need to say the right words, because they're not doing it. It's like a child not learning to walk because they sit still all the time. A child can't learn to walk unless they practice walking. A child can't learn to talk unless they practice talking. And it makes sense that their talking system could have some decreased coordination with lack of practice. And it would be a mistake to label that child with a neurological condition like apraxia if it is a lack of experience that's causing a child. And you're not going to know that in a child who's only 2.5, who's late talking, if they have an expressive language delay, because your child is late walking, but they're walking. So those motor planning things did develop in your child, and all the other things that were going on did develop. And I'll bet your child did learn to walk by practicing walking. Your child didn't learn to walk by laying on the floor, moving their leg. That might have been part of their physical therapy when they were really little. But as soon as your child was able to be up on their own, crawling, moving, that's what your physical therapist did. Because the only way to learn to walk is to practice walking. You're never going to do it unless you practice it. And what prompt therapy does is like laying on the floor, moving your leg or arm without ever practicing the verbal speech that goes along with it. So this is what's really, really important to understand about apraxia. And I'm just going to let you know really quick about some other resources that you can use this summer with your child. So what you need to do is first subscribe or follow my Facebook page so that you're notified all the time whenever I go live or whenever I upload a new video, because I'm doing 3 new videos a week this summer. I always do 3 new videos a week, but the videos this summer are all about summer language facilitation and how you can get your child to talk this summer no matter what's going on. So you can follow these videos on my Facebook page and on my YouTube channel. The links are below to do that. You can also join my language facilitation resources group. I post information every single day that is designed to help parents think about language facilitation. And there's all different causes of late talking. So this summer, it's my goal to help as many parents as possible teach your kids how to use natural speech. So my YouTube channel and my Facebook page are what you need to do. Follow those things. And if you really want to dig in and know the exact way to do it, how to do your own analysis, how to do your own, identify the blockages to your child's verbal speech and know all the strategies, get trained on videos specifically with the strategies, you can register for my language facilitation Basics Independent Study course. It will teach you how to do it. It's $500. It is the best investment for any language facilitator parent you could ever make, because it is literally the step-by-step process in how to identify what the actual causes of your child's late talking is, not just relying on a diagnosis like apraxia or autism or expressive language. You want to know exactly what's blocking your child's verbal speech and what to do to help them develop it. So that all is in my language facilitation basics course, and you can get the links to all those are below this video. Okay, so here's the next question from Gladys, who says, "Hi Marcy, what about if they're barely trying to label certain things, very few at 2.5?" Okay, so what I recommend for kids who aren't using any verbal speech at all is usually it's because they are stuck in their nonverbal communication patterns and they're getting the things that they want with other ways. So what you want to do is you want to look for the video on my YouTube channel about how to reach and teach your late talking child, because if your child's not using words to label, even just like you said, they were saying a few things, that means they're not hearing enough of natural verbal speech from you. They're only hearing single words, and you might be talking to them a whole lot. But there's a difference between you talking to them and them actually paying attention and listening and processing the speech that you're saying. So here's what you need to do. Really analyze, is your child listening and focusing to all the speech you're saying? And then you have to understand that. And that's why most kids don't pick it up, because at some point they got used to learning how to communicate their things another way, and they get stuck in those methods. You need to shift your child over. So Gladys, you can watch the Reach and Teach videos. And if you are in my language facilitation resources group, look at the tip of the week videos. There's demonstrations on how to do this, on how to get kids to focus and attend in those videos. So that's what you want to do. All right. So Alyssa says, my daughter was 23 weaker. Whew, baby. 1 pound. Oh my goodness, spent 137 days in the NICU, diagnosed with ASD at 3. She's extremely smart, but barely starting to put simple words together. Motor issues, late walker, seems to do things about 2 years late, been in therapy since 6 months. And she also says, what are the techniques with a very smart ASD child, but has a hard time communicating? Communicating feelings seems to be the hardest. We use a device and sign language. So Alyssa, there are things that I would need to know more about how to help you facilitate natural verbal speech. But here's the thing, if she was at 23, she's been in therapy since forever, 2 years late, since 6 months, and she's at 3. She's super smart. So here's what's going on with most preemies. First of all, more than 20% of premature kids are late talking, and your child's late everything because she was late coming out, early coming out. She needed time to finish cooking on the outside. So, first of all, congratulations on survival this far. And, hopefully she's been healthy and happy that whole time. But here's the thing that happens so many times with preemies who have a lot of, complex issues or who very early. They start in therapy at 6 months. She was already months late, 20 days, 20 weeks late, almost, less than, whatever. That's a long time. Even if she's, 20 weeks, that's months and months and months of time. And so at 6 months, she was barely at newborn development, and you started therapy to try to teach her to do things, even though she'd been on the planet for 6 months, right? So, and I don't know how big she was at 6 months, but still pretty small, and 100% of her experience on the outside had been medical intervention, at least for the first, if she was only 1 pound, right? On ventilators and tubes and all of these things. So her existence on Earth on the outside required a lot more human care than most children coming into the world, for survival even. And so as a parent of a child who has this many physiological needs, your mindset tends to stay in, what else can we do to help her? What else can we do to help her? What else can we do to help her? And sign language and devices are usually where people tend to go when they've been in therapy for a long time with limited progress. And kids like this might make very slow progress because they aren't even finished physiologically developing. So what's happened is the natural neurological language learning stuff didn't even kick in those motor planning, those language learning neurological processes that are necessary and innate in every child, but your child didn't develop yet because she was born early. And then what happened was the first language learning that she had was top down. This is what the vocabulary is. This is what this is. It wasn't natural language learning. It was therapy. It was vocabulary. It was teach her to say words. It was teach her to exchange things. I don't know what it is whenever you get into that point. And then what happens is natural language doesn't develop because the therapy gets in the way. The teaching kids vocabulary and this is a this and that is a that and this is a this is different than the same natural language learning experiences that happen for kids. So your child had the blockages of the physiology. She was a late walker, so she was focused on ambulation and getting around, not even focused on verbal speech. And then what happened simultaneously is nobody gave her a chance to model natural verbal speech. So Alyssa, my suggestion for you is that you need to really reassess how is your child learning to say the words that she's saying. And if she physiologically can move her mouth to say words, how are you teaching her to say words at all if you're using sign language and PECs or a device, okay? You need to be practicing verbal speech talking in order to do that. And there are videos about how to do that on my YouTube channel. So definitely that's what you need to watch. All right, so Adriana says, hi Marcy, my little girl says a lot of words and sentences, but now they are not all clear. My question is, we speak to her in English and Spanish, but she says most all the words we know in English. Should I do my language facilitate only in English? Okay. So there's two issues there, Adriana. The first is that her speech is hard to understand even though she is talking, and the second is you're using two languages. Let me talk about the second first. It is okay to do language facilitation in multiple languages if there are multiple languages readily heard in your household. The rule is only speak one language at a time and speak each language clearly. So there's a lot more to that, but that's the short answer about multiple languages, okay? The second thing is kids have speech sound problems or intelligibility problems, speech clarity problems for different reasons. And if your child was a late talker due to ear infections, maybe she didn't hear speech clearly. If she is a late talker due to tongue tie or some kind of other physiological things, she might have a physical problem that she can't move her mouth around the easiest way to say words. It could be that she is mumbling both languages together because a lot of kids when they learn two languages, they tend to mix them together, but usually they don't mix it in the same word. They mix a phrase, so they'll say, like you said, Spanish, so she might say, I want leche, like that. It would be a phrase that would be more mixed up because of the two language than in one individual word. So my suggestion always for parents who have kids who have speech sound problems, first of all, there's videos on that on my YouTube channel. You can look at that, speech sound clarity problems. And you can also, like I said, use some very limited language, very limited speech, and look for patterns in her talking. So is it one word that she always says wrong the same way, or is she using a pattern or crossword, always leaving off the ends of words, always leaving off the beginning of the words? And if those errors are inconsistent and you can't pick out a pattern, that means that it's developmental and that she just needs more practice with verbal speech, hearing it clearly spoken so that she can put all of those things together to process the natural verbal speech. And there are specific strategies to work on speech articulation, but every child's different in how they do it. So that's where I can send you to get you started. Okay, Lorina says, hello. I love your information. Thank you so much for joining me, Lorna. I have a 5-year-old, wants to talk. He is ASD, or he has an ASD diagnosis anyway. It seems to me that he loves playing on his own, and even when he needs something, okay, he refuses to talk. I have tried putting things out of reach, but he'd rather not have the things than ask for them. I know that his vocabulary is extensive. So, Lorina, that old trick of putting things out of reach and making your kids say words to get them is not a way to teach natural verbal speech. It's just a behavior to get your child to do the things. And if the behavior seems difficult, boring, repetitive, or unnecessary to your child, they're not going to do it, especially if it's you. They might do it in therapy because the therapists have fun games and they're new and they're not their mother who gives them everything else. But what usually happens in cases like yours is when families have been used to responding to their kids' nonverbal communication, or maybe the kids just adapted the ability to get things on their own, and the therapists say, well, now you have to put it out of reach, so the child is forced to ask you. The child has to. It's necessary for them to talk in order to get the things that they want. And whenever you do that to a child, it's like, taking the rug out from under them, because their whole lives they've been using whatever they've been using and getting those things, and you've made life difficult overnight without any kind of motivation for your child to want to try to say words. You've just made it more difficult, and your child doesn't think it's worth it. And the way to change this whole process is by eliminating all of those things and helping your child learn how to ask for things with verbal speech by demonstrating how to do that yourself with language facilitation. And I could give you all the strategies. You can learn them in my online course, or I could give them to you in my Waves of Communication programs, or you could start digging through videos and find them. But this is an easy solution for parents. In fact, every parent in my program who stops prompting, they eliminate most, if not all, of their kids' ABA language teaching. They reserve ABA for behaviors only and not language teaching if they do ABA. And if they do use it for language, they use it for receptive language only, not expressive language. And if you do that and you eliminate that same expressive language prompting at home, then your child will learn to shift. That's the only way, actually, that they'll learn to shift from those nonverbal things that they're using to communicate or getting things on their own into using natural verbal speech with you. And if your child is already resistant to your teaching, then you continue to do those teachings. Your child's only obviously going to be increasingly resistant. So you need to make some changes right now, Lorina, if you want this pattern to stop, because that's what it's all about. It's all about patterns and language development. So Adriana says the few words, the few words that she says in Spanish are very clear. I don't want her to be confused. So you just use one language at a time. She won't be confused. There's a video on bilingual language facilitation, and you can watch that on my YouTube channel too. A whole video, multiple ones that I've seen. Go to the YouTube channel. If you go on a desktop, you can go on my channel and you can search on my channel. There's almost 200 videos there. So you can just search for bilingual, or search for Apraxia, or search for autism diagnosis, or search for reach and teach, or search for strategies, and you'll get a bunch. There are some playlists identified over there too, so you can dig through and find videos. But yep, at 7 months, she was 8 pounds. Right. So at 8 pounds, she's really catching up and doing a lot of helping, but her little brain was still only a newborn. You know what I mean? The neural pathways for natural verbal development, the more nuanced language learning, neuroscience stuff that's going on in a child's developing brain haven't been developed yet. They develop from exposure. So if the first cognitive ability to be exposed to language is all do this, say this, do this, say this, do this, say this, that's how they're going to learn to develop language. And it's going to be do this, say this language. It's not going to be natural language verbal speech. It's not going to be natural conversational speech, because you're too busy do this, say this going on. So that's what's going on. Can teaching the two language hinder their progress? No, Lorina. In fact, the parents in my program, one of the most successful families, they speak Bengali at home. They live in Australia because they're there working, and their kiddo learned both languages, started speaking both languages the same week. So yeah, it does not hinder at all. Thanks for this information. You were so welcome, Adriana. Helped me a lot. She does that in different words in English, but the few words she says in Spanish are clear. So yep, that's how you're going to do it. One language at a time. And if the language, if the English is less clear, that means she's not focusing on it as well as she's focusing on the Spanish. So maybe you use Spanish a lot at home. And she probably really likes to hear you speak Spanish. So that's the other reason that I wouldn't stop speaking both languages. Clarity says, in your last video, you mentioned kids with ASD using their checklist in terms of learning from prompting. I've heard a lot of autistic adults say that as well, but also mention that learning to generalize in all areas, including social rules, helps to eliminate anxiety and shut down when the rules are broken. Is your language facilitation a lot like that, helping to generalize? Yes, Charity, language facilitation is all about generalization. There is no individual language teaching without generalization. It's all done in the process of everyday life, so that your child hears you say the right words the right way at the right time with lots of repetition and during the everyday activities. In fact, I tell parents you can get more language facilitation done in the car ride to a 30-minute speech pathology appointment with a speech therapist than your child will get out of that speech therapy appointment. If you use language facilitation correctly. You as parents can do this. And if you want guidance, come back next week and join me on my live Q&A. If you're not in my programs, and if you're in my programs, you have potential to have lifetime access where I coach you through all the strategies you need. I have a mom I just talked to today. Her little guy just turned 8, and last year he was completely nonverbal. We haven't even been working together a year, and now he's saying things like, I want to eat Chinese food today. And they're working now on developing more, increasing conversational speech, and really, really enjoying. He was using an iPad system, and he eliminated the iPad system in the first week of language facilitation because he had so many words inside and no one was teaching him to talk except everybody was teaching him to use these devices and sign language, and his mom was the only one who was trying to get him to do verbal speech. And that's what happened. She gave up all the prompting. She gave up all the stuff, and her guy is talking. And now they're having conversation, like literally their strategies this week were to do language facilitation at a coffee shop where they can have conversational speech and practice conversational speech. And so you can get to this point if you work like this mom did during your everyday activities. And that's how it goes. That's exactly how it works. So Charity, I hope you check out my videos and I hope you learn how to do it, because when you have so many rules and expectations of your kids and they're so worried about breaking rules, then they can't focus on natural verbal speech. That's those rules and structured situations that they have to comply with and respond to and own up to. And it's testing all day long. And it's no fun. Nobody likes that kind of testing. And that's why it doesn't generalize, because the only way you know if it's working is by testing it. So you test and test and test and test and test. And then the kids don't like it and they start to go away and they start to not want to, be interested in what you're doing. And when a child goes away from you, that means that they don't get the exposure to the natural verbal speech that you could be providing them. So every time you prompt your child to talk instead of facilitating the speech that they would need, you're missing the opportunity, and so is your child, to hear the speech that they want to say. You have to teach them the words that they want to say, not the words that you want to hear. I'm going to say it one more time and then I'm going to go. You have to teach your child to say the words that they want to say instead of the words that you want to hear. And that's how natural language facilitation works. Check out my videos on Facebook and YouTube. Give this video a like and share, and I will see you all next week on the live Q&A. Be watching for my Wave of the Week and Tools for Parents videos to come out as well. I'll see you all on my next video. Have a great weekend, everybody.